All right. Thanks everyone for joining. Today,
if we can, let's have Laura introduce you first.
Please, yes, of course.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you're having a wonderful afternoon. My name is Laura Kartalian, and I'm a faculty member in the English department here at GCC. I'm also a member of the Armenian Genocide Commemoration Committee for this year. So we truly appreciate your attendance here today as we continue our conversations around resiliency after genocide and the path of healing through community. So tomorrow is our final day of events as we explore the anthology of Armenian music, and that event is going to be at 7 p.m. tomorrow night. Today, we have the honor of discussing Armenian identities and their discontents with our guest speaker, Emil Sanamyan, research fellow at the USC Institute of Armenian Studies. I welcome you to read his bio on the cultural diversity page. So this event will be recorded, and the recording will be available in about a week or so. For today's event, we would encourage everyone to stay after the lecture, as we will have a healing circle led by Alina Krikorian, which will allow us to reflect upon what we learned through our conversation. It will take place from 1:30 to 2:30, so please join us if time allows. So just so you know, during the transition between the two events, we will stop the recording. So the healing circle itself will not be recorded. It's a safe space for everybody to be able to really articulate what it is that they're feeling. So there will be two separate sign-in sheets for the event. So if you're able to stay for both, please do be sure that you sign in separately for each event, and those will be shared periodically in the chat. We invite everyone to sign in, faculty, staff, students, guests, etc. And if you have trouble signing in, please let us know and we can certainly help you with that. The links, again, will be periodically shared through the chat, and you will also receive a link to a survey that will be used for the first event. We also have ASL interpretation and closed captioning available for anyone who might benefit from these services. And with that said, I would like to turn it over to today's guest speaker, Mr. Emil Sanamyan, as we discuss the relationship of healing with our Armenian identities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone who put this together. I appreciate an opportunity to talk to your students, and I hope we have a little bit of this has been a Glendale Community College, one of colleges that sort of in one of the center of the Armenian community life. We will. I assume that students come with some knowledge of Armenia, some knowledge of Armenian history. So if there are something that is new for you or something that's not clear, obviously I'll hope there'll be an opportunity to ask questions and clarify, and I'll try to be brief enough to be able to accommodate all of that. So I will talk a little bit about religion, culture, and politics and how they helped shape Armenian identities. And again, I want to stress it's multiple identities. Discuss the nature of relations between the homeland of Armenia and the diaspora communities of Armenia, the impact of the genocide recognition campaign, and the conflict over Artsakh or Karabakh that's ongoing to this day, involving Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. After writing down the title, I realized that it was an unintentional but probably some subconscious throwback to Sigmund Freud's Civilization and its discontents. Sigmund Freud being the fairly well-known Austrian thinker, psychoanalyst, as most people think of him. So I'll quote the old man and try to walk away from that quote and see how we understand it. He wrote something along those lines. Civilization creates laws that prohibit instinctual acts, and it implements severe punishments if those rules are broken. Thus, our possibilities for happiness as human animals are restricted by the law. This process is an inherent quality of civilization. It gives rise to perpetual feelings of discontent among its citizens. We'll be talking about identity, one of the key aspects of that make modern civilization, national identity, national state identity, and how they guide and restrict our lives. One way to describe identity is as a set of traits that anchors us in particular with a particular human group or groups, and provides a straitjacket of sorts that informs our attention spans, biases, and often determines key decisions in our lives. Where to live, who to live with, which sports team to support or teams to support, and what to talk about on a given April day. What have been the most important identity forming influences when it comes to Armenians? As I mentioned, religion was originally the main identity marker for Armenians. If we look at what defined Armenians historically, it was belonging to the Armenian Apostolic Church. There are a couple of exceptions, but that was the main aspect of the identity. That's what made you an Armenian. Basically, were you baptized in the Armenian Church? Are you in good standing with the Armenian Church? If you are, then you are an Armenian. Otherwise, no. This was pretty much the case until about 200 years ago. To this day, it's the case in some communities, particularly in the Middle East. Belonging to the church community is very, very significant, very important to be considered part of the Armenian community. Once you crossed, if you look historically though, in the Armenian homeland, once you crossed into another religious affiliation, you were lost, you were no longer an Armenian. This one story that I tried to track down the source for, but sort of retained in my memory, but not as a complete reference, but I'm fairly comfortable citing it, in the form of historical anecdote, but very relevant, I think, to the history of Armenians. Of course, Armenians were a subjugated people for many, many centuries after the fall of the Armenian states. And a particular largest Armenian community was part of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. And there was a regular practice in the Ottoman Turkish Empire related to blood tax. It was primarily practiced in the Balkans, where the authorities, delegates of the authorities, frequently converts from Balkan nations, would go into subjugated communities, primarily Serbs, Bulgarians, and also Armenians and Georgians, and select the best looking girls and the strongest and sometimes also best looking boys to bring them to harems, to bring them to serve the Sultan. And there's a story of one of these groups coming to one of the Armenian settlements in historic Armenia, taking the girls and the boys and taking them away to be converted and to be made basically servants of the Sultan. And there is a story of Armenian parents, I don't know, the people who didn't want that to happen, trying to intercept that caravan overnight before they come to a location where they would be converted. Because from the perspective of, we're talking about roughly 18th century, from the perspective of the Armenians, once they're converted, they're no longer returnable. So that notion of religious affiliation was so very significant that if their own son or daughter had been converted, given a different name, that ended that link between the parent and the child. Of course, we don't think in those terms today, but that was the importance of the religious affiliation at the time. And since the Armenian church was a church of a stateless nation with political influence, with little political influence, one condition for its continued existence as a separate entity was not to proselytize, meaning not to convert other people into the Armenian church. So you had a long process of Armenians basically crossing over into either Islamic faith, be that Sunni or Shia, or into Orthodox Christianity, Georgian church, Greek church, but very little reverse movement. There are some exceptions with a few groups like that for various reasons became Armenian, say some Georgian groups, some other North Caucasian groups that converted to the Armenianness, even though they came from other cultures. So the Russian conquest is what made revolutionary change in the Armenian homeland. This occurred roughly 200 years ago. The empire, as it introduced everything into this relatively unpopulated at the time, relatively desolate area, built towns, built roads, railroad, also importantly built schools, promoted news media, newspapers at the time. And the schools and the literature and the newspapers is what began to produce the Armenian cultural identity, in addition to the religious identity. That was the second important marker. So until 19th century, there was no secular Armenian cultural identity that was influential enough to be retained by a bulk of Armenians. Members of the Armenian church, the Armenians, spoke of wide variety of dialects of Armenian, and many of them spoke primarily non-Armenian languages, mostly Turkish, but also Kurdish, and some spoke Farsi. I was gonna show you a map of the area of Armenia at the time of the Russian conquest. So there's two maps here. Let's do this one first. So this is a map, a later map of Armenian dialects, and it sort of basically also shows the spread of the Armenian population at the turn of the century. The greener colors indicate the Eastern Armenian dialects, and the orangey, light yellow colors indicate the Western Armenian dialects. There's a whole list there, but basically spreads shows the spread of the bulk of the Armenian population before the genocide of the Armenian people at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. But what's important to note is that this does not imply that only Armenians lived in this area, from the Caspian Sea on the left almost all the way to the Mediterranean. I'm sorry, on the right, Caspian Sea on the right, and the Mediterranean and Black Sea on the left. It was a multicultural area, and the majority of the population was actually non-Armenian by the time already, before the time of the genocide already. And this other map I wanted to show you. Get better at this. Are you seeing this map with the yellow contours here or no?
We cannot. Emil, if you can stop sharing your screen and then share your screen again with the new map.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So this is a map of the South Caucasus, so the eastern part of the Armenian homeland. And here in yellow shown are the areas that were majority Armenian populated as of 1800s, roughly the time of Russian conquest. So as you can see, most even of the Armenian Republic was not Armenian populated. There is a big island here towards the right. That's the Artsakh. In the south, that's Sunik, parts of southern Armenia. So returning to the cultural aspect of the Armenian markers. So by the time, markers of the Armenian identity, by the time of the 20th century, Armenia already had their own writers, their own poets, their own composers, of course, all of whom were educated in the Western, through Western and the Russian school systems and university systems that made them understood to the world, the ideas that they wrote about and the ideas that they promulgated. This cultural it's hard even to call it a renaissance, but definitely cultural birth of Armenian nation occurred throughout 19th century into the 20th century. And at the turn of the 19th, 20th century, we had the third important marker of the Armenian identity being created, and that is Armenian political identity. So by the early 20th century, you could already be an atheist, non-religious person, not affiliated to the Armenian church. You could be culturally American, Russian, at the time less so American, but European, but at the same time an Armenian activist, and sort of play an important role in Armenian political developments. And political identities naturally led to struggles for self-governance, for autonomy from the empires. Like I said, Armenians were primarily living in the Ottoman Empire, also in Persian and the Russian Empire. So at the turn of the century, Armenian activists were kind of engaged in the struggle against all three empires for more rights. And of course, this was not isolated Armenian phenomenon. It was a phenomenon that was commonplace at the time, because movement against tyranny espoused by the Sultan, Tsar of Russia, or Shah of Iran was challenged, and not just by Armenians, but also by Turkish population, by Kurdish population, by others. So these three elements of identity, the religious, cultural, and political, came together to form the Armenian identity as we understand it today. And they didn't, of course, come together smoothly or without tension. The tension continues. And after the genocide, of course, we had huge dispersion of the Armenian population from the original homeland of Armenians throughout the world. We had the creation of the Armenian diaspora. And today, to this day, we have roughly, there's different estimates, but I would say 8 million Armenians around the world, with 3 million in the homeland and 5 million in the diaspora. So diaspora includes more Armenians than the homeland, and this was always the case in the history of Armenians, modern history of Armenians, the last several centuries. It's always been the case. There were more Armenians living outside of Armenian state, because the Armenian state only came about roughly 100 years ago, 1918. Modern Armenian state, I'm not talking about medieval and the other historical representations of the Armenian identity. So we have the homeland and we have the diaspora, and Armenian officials, diaspora figures, like to promote the notion that there is diaspora homeland unity, that there is sometimes even references to the trinity of Armenia, Artsakh, Armenian populated Karabakh, and diaspora sort of having the pseudo-religious overtones to God, Son, and the Holy Spirit. One of the most prominent Armenian American educators who recently, unfortunately, passed away, Vartan Grigoryan, recently, a few years ago, likened Armenian diaspora to two lungs of a single body. I personally don't share this sort of romanticized notions. I don't think they're accurate descriptions of what Armenian diaspora are to one another. I see the Armenian state and the Armenian diasporas as direct opposite modes of Armenian existence, antipodes. And in fact, Los Angeles and Yerevan are roughly 11 time zones apart, almost directly on the opposite sides of the planet, and Los Angeles being one of the major Armenian community centers. Armenian state, by definition, has defined territory. Diaspora does not, by its own very definition. Most of the people in Armenia carry the same Armenian documents, go to the Armenian schools with the same curriculum. Male half of the Armenian citizenry goes to the army, and unfortunately died in great numbers this last year in this recent Turkish war against Armenia. Diasporans carry documents of all sorts of different states. Only a minority studies in Armenian schools, and very rarely Armenians from diaspora go to Armenia to serve in the army. There are some cases, but they're very, very few. Diaspora communities and Armenia are competitors for Armenians. As Armenia shrinks, diaspora grows. as diaspora shrinks, Armenia grows. We think of this examples through post-Soviet emigration, where you had a big emigration out of Armenia when borders of the Soviet Union opened, and people, mostly people who had relatives in US already would emigrate to United States and other countries, but primarily United States, but also former Soviet republics of Russia and others. And we also had cases where Armenian communities, diaspora communities, such as in the Middle East, would find themselves amidst conflict, such as Syrian Armenian community most recently, and they would go to Armenia. So Armenia would benefit from their presence, but at the expense of the community in Syria. Diaspora-born figures have had serious impact in Armenia, especially those who came to live in Armenia. A little discussed, but majority of Armenian leaders of the 20th century, and this, I mean, from the First Republic of 1918 through the Soviet period and into present day, majority of them were born outside of Armenian homeland. Many of them in Russia, and many of them, some of them in the other places in Europe, in Turkey, but they came from abroad to under various circumstances, and became very prominent persons in Armenia, leaders of Armenia. There's only been roughly 24 leaders of Armenia over 1 century of Armenian statehood. Armenia, unlike diaspora, has one leader at a time. Diaspora has many prominent individuals, but no obvious leaders. That's another big difference between Armenia and diaspora. Armenia is a nation state where one ethnic group dominates. Most diasporans live in multi-ethnic communities, and the list goes on in terms of the Armenian diasporas being antipode of each other. And by engaging in Armenian cultural production through churches, schools, news media, diaspora normalizes Armenian national existence outside of Armenian homeland. And through its economic affluence, obviously, most Armenian diasporas today live in countries that are wealthier than Armenia proper. Diaspora serves as a magnet for immigration from Armenia. So Armenians continue to go to countries where they have families, they have friends, and they have Armenian communities. Finally, the great difference between Armenia and diaspora is in political priorities. For the past 50 years, recognition of the Armenian genocide has been the overarching priority for Armenian diasporas, especially in the Western diaspora, especially in this country, in the United States. The campaign preceded Armenia's independence from the Soviet Union, which was in 1991. And except for a brief period following the earthquake, which devastated Armenia in '88, shortly before independence, and the first war in Artsakh in the early '90s, the issue of the recognition of the genocide remained the main priority of the diaspora. Meantime, for Armenia, issues of immediate security, particularly Artsakh and Turkey's role in that conflict, remained paramount, and that culminated in the devastating losses of the war last year. What is the reason for this disconnect? I can speculate that, unlike the Fight for Artsakh genocide campaign, does not demand personal sacrifices to the same extent. It is not controversial to the point of being sterile. It is also easily understood as a universal issue. Armenians in Turkey were victims of extreme form of government abuse, and that genocide served as a precedent for genocides later. Artsakh war and even the general politics in Armenia are messy and require the sort of sacrifices that the vast majority of Armenians are not ready for. What comes first, diaspora or the state? That's a question that could be posed as well. We need to keep in mind that the Armenian state is a new unstable phenomenon born out of circumstances brought on by changing power balances 200 years ago. And in spite of what most Armenians thought were priorities of the day, priorities of the day always have to do with security and the economics and the well-being of individual families and clans, and depending how far back we're looking at. Diaspora communities preceded the Armenian state and will likely be around long after the Armenian Republic might be again subsumed by other larger entities. Identity formation is a process that is continuous and influenced by precedents and trends, by carriers of other identities, and it is normal to be conflictual and for it to be conflictual and controversial. So I merely highlight some aspects of Armenian identities that are often under-talked or overlooked, as often happens in families that seek to keep their domestic disputes and differences private. Thank you for your attention. If you have questions, I'll be very happy to entertain them and try to answer them.
Thank you so much for that, Emil. That was very, very interesting. I know I had a couple of questions sent my way, but I wanted to first ask if anybody had any questions that they wanted to share now. Okay. I'll go ahead and go to one of the questions. So one message that came through said, in our class today, we were discussing the plurality of space and identity and the multi-generational trauma that came from genocide. Can you talk a little bit more about how that impacts one's identity today?
My sense of this, and I'll give you my personal story. I think people would like to know maybe where I come from and what am I. I was born in Baku in Azerbaijan, so that my parents, my grandparents, we were living there until 1988, the start of the conflict between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. Armenians in Azerbaijan were basically expelled from Azerbaijan or were forced to leave. So did my family. So we left. We lived in Russia for several years before immigrating to the United States. This is still back in the Soviet period, before the independence of Armenia. I personally did not experience any kind of anti-Armenian violence or anti-Armenian attacks. Myself personally, I was a child at the time, so I didn't have to deal with adult issues. But I, of course, know people who have read about that, etc. I'm now raising two children, and I don't intend to make that a cornerstone of their identity. I think it's important to be able to learn on your own and learn from mistakes and make your own mistakes. So I do see that the political aspect of the Armenian identity, especially in diaspora, is so much focused on the trauma of the genocide, even though we are now increasingly traumatized by all kinds of different other events. And if we look at the history of the Armenian nation, today here in the United States, we've had waves of trauma related to events in America or related to, say, events in the Soviet Union, where many present-day Armenian Americans came from, related to World War II, in addition to the genocide related to the Soviet repression, related to the conflict and privations associated with earthquake, for example, etc. So we have to keep in mind, I think, the sense that the trauma will be with us. I think it's important to not to make that the cornerstone of your identity, and it's important, I think, to supplement any aspects of trauma with positive elements of the identity, and make it possible for it to be celebrated in a way, in a light way, and not necessarily just on April 24th in a way that we often do it in the United States.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you for sharing that personal relationship with your family too, and the way that you're choosing to raise your children. We have another question. So during the war in Artsakh, there was a sense of diasporan guilt that weighed very heavily on so many of us. While the war influenced us to honor our relationship with our Armenian identities, it also made us question if we were doing enough from a distance. Can you share ways in which that might affect our identities?
Yeah, I think that I experienced that myself. I experienced that sense of guilt, experienced that sense of being torn about what to do. We have to realize that living in the diaspora, we are guilty when it comes to not being Armenian. If you have that element of connection to Armenia. You feel for Armenia, you sympathize with what people in Armenia go through. You kind of, can't escape that sense of guilt. However, I have to say also that it is important for us to think of Armenia and to think of Armenian future as in a process of transformation. That it's not the end all be all. There's sometimes this idealist view of what Armenia is and what it could be, and a sort of conservative idealist that it should be frozen in time. And if there is a village and if there is a church, that's where they are, that's where they always were, and that's what they always should be. Whereas real history of human history is, of course, full of all kinds of transformations, all kinds of destruction, all kinds of reconstruction, and all kinds of neglect. If we look at the sort of the main kind of markers of Armenian material production, most of them are fairly new. If we look at the Armenian buildings, historic buildings, most of them were restored in the last 100 years. They were in ruins 100 years ago. If we look at even, sort of things that we consider the quintessential Armenian things, I don't know, Armenian brandy or something, it's all very new. It's not very historic in a longer than 100 years reference term. So we have to be prepared for things to change in Armenia, and perhaps change in a way that many of us will not like, or many of us will find questionable. But it's a reality that small countries such as Armenia can only really exist and can only really exist in a stable environment if they had at least benign neglect from great powers that might be in their vicinity, might be interested in them, etc. So for the last roughly 25 years, Armenia had that benign neglect from Turkey until last year, when Turkey sent its air force to bomb Armenian forces, and kill a neighborhood of 4,000 Armenians. Today, the question is whether Armenia can persevere after this, and how, and what form or shape. And it's clear that Armenians don't have enough resources to contend with Turkish power. So we will have to decide how do we right this power imbalance. And fortunately, there are not that many choices. Basically, Armenia is turning to Russia again to provide for its security. Even though, of course, it comes on particular terms that we don't like. For example, now Russian military basically is in control of what remains of Armenian Artsakh, and they're regulating who can come into Artsakh, who cannot come into Artsakh. And there have been some issues with news media, for example, BBC or some other people like that, not being able to go to Artsakh anymore. Because the Russians say, well, we don't want the BBC covering us here. So they just don't let them in. They're in control. And if that regime extends to Armenia, it has extended to Armenian parts of Republic of Armenia, Sudik, etc., south of Armenia, this will continue to be the case. Who can go to Armenia and who cannot go to Armenia will not be decided by Armenians, but by the Russian government if they're in charge of security. And other changes will occur, of course, to the economy, etc. But there has to be, unless somehow the Armenian leaders can find a modus operandi with the Turkish government and stabilize the situation. But currently, the situation is very dangerous for Armenia. It's unclear to everybody how far Turkey can go. And if it's unclear, they might go fairly far. So, sorry, kind of long-winded question. No, answer, sorry.
No, thank you for that. It's good to establish the relationships with what's expected from the other countries, and also what individuals are feeling while in the diaspora. So thank you for that. We have another question from the chat. As a Latina, how can I support and learn more about the Armenian community?
Well, as anyone, I think obviously it's great to have friends of all kinds of backgrounds, and I personally benefited from a great number of friendships with Armenians and non-Armenians. So I think it starts with a friendship with other people, and when you see people in distress, it doesn't have to be because something is happening in Armenia. And you extend your hand. I think that's a foundational element of friendship generally. And if you're interested in Armenia, of course, you get a chance to visit Armenia, please do. I think that would be a very beneficial experience for anyone visiting another new country and sort of soaking in its smell and its taste and its people. In the sense that no other way of experiencing Armenian culture will be complete without visiting Armenia and experiencing it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we're so blessed to have such a culturally diverse community at GCC. And I've seen in so many ways people really supporting one another in various instances. So thank you for that. It was shared in the chat. You can also take History 121 or Ethics 164 at GCC to learn about the Armenian community in more depth. It was also shared relating back to the answer that you had provided formerly about how to support Armenia. It's important to help the economy of Armenia. There's a new website, buyarmenian.com, which has been established during the war of Artsakh to promote small businesses, artists, etc. of Armenians around the world by Lilith and Nishan Odabakhshian. It is a secure place to shop, and it is like a marketplace of Armenian products, and they have reasonable shipping charges. I just wanted to share. I've actually purchased things from there too, and I can account to the really beautiful products that are available, and of course, supporting Hayastan. A couple more questions here. Or I should reshare these comments first, actually. So we're also developing a new humanities course about the Armenian American experience. Yes, thank you for sharing that. And we have another question. Can you speak more about the role of media in the portrayal of the attacks on Artsakh, especially given the influence of powerful governments on how stories are portrayed?
Yeah, I was once a journalist, and of course mostly focused on Armenian matters, so a very peculiar type of journalist. But media generally has a number of key challenges. One is, of course, the main point of media is trying to explain something in a way that would catch people's attention, and they're just the attention spans of people are fairly limited. So when it comes to the Western media, American media, to justify a trip to Armenia, even as blood flows and bombs are exploding, is not an easy task. Actually, this particular war in September, October, November last year occurred at kind of it's a ridiculous way to say it, but kind of in terms of media coverage, it benefited from the fact that due to COVID pandemic, there had been no wars for a while, or nothing to cover in the kind of in a way that wars are typically covered. So because of that, there was actually a large number of media that arrived in Armenia to cover the war. And I don't know of any, perhaps CNN wasn't there, but CNN doesn't do much foreign policy coverage or foreign coverage today. Not so much about domestic politics in the United States, but major media people go to for international news. Again, BBC and Al Jazeera and everything you can think of. The French news, 24 News, the Russian media, of course. And that, of course, was not the case on the Azerbaijani side, because Azerbaijan is a very closed country for media. You can't visit Azerbaijan without a visa from most countries, and you get a visa in advance. And if you're in media, you have to get government permission, you have to get government guidance, etc. In Armenia, it was a free flow. You could just jump on a plane that has a connection to Armenia, which was a challenge at the time because again COVID. But a lot of media. Bottom line, a lot of media arrived in Armenia. Of course, we had another challenge from the Armenian government. Is that they were not really that ready to work with a lot of foreign media, and they don't have that much experience. And originally, there were a couple of trips to the frontline areas, and there were incidents such as I think it was October 1st, several days into the war, when a group of media visited the frontline town in Karabakh, Martuni, and they were shelled by Azerbaijani artillery. And one journalist from France, two journalists from France were wounded. I think their local translator was killed, and other people were also injured. After that, they basically prohibited a lot of the trips, and basically because of the way the war was going, there was a lot of disorganization, and they basically tried to keep media away from the front line, tried to keep them either in Stepanakert, and then when Stepanakert started to get shelled intensively, they moved them to Goris, to a nearby Armenian town. So, and then when you had first setbacks in the war, which started roughly around April 6, 7, 8, and some of the better Russian media started to cover the setbacks, wrote about the fact that quite a few Armenians are getting killed. The journalist who wrote that was expelled from Armenia by the Armenian government. Basically, they thought that they didn't want coverage of bad developments. They just wanted coverage that would show things are going okay. So we've had this combination of factors. On one hand, there was big media presence in Armenia originally. However, there were real security challenges, and that wasn't just one case in Martuni. Then in Shushi, there was a bombing of the main Armenian church of Shushi, the Cathedral of Shushi, and it was attacked with precision-guided missiles. After it was attacked, it was visited by journalists, and as journalists were visiting, another attack occurred, and the journalists were wounded. So we had those real security issues related to journalist security, but also there was a sense by the Armenian government they wanted media to cover things, but in kind of cover the shelling, but not the fighting, because fighting is more messy. It was both because of the security and the fighting. As the fighting started to go badly, they didn't want that covered. So the media kind of attention atrophied towards the war and went away. But of course, I wouldn't say that there was not enough media attention. There was plenty of media attention from the beginning.
Okay, thank you so much. And we had a question here. Can you share a little bit about the work you do at the USC Institute of Armenian Studies? What has been the most fulfilling part of your work?
But there's a great team at the USC Armenian Studies. That's the most important part of it. We have really great individuals there, starting with Salpi Azarian, and some of the other people I can think of, Susanna, Geham, etc. That's always the most important aspect of working anywhere, working with people, that you have a lot of things in common, but also have different perspectives coming from different places that where you come from. And of course, as I was earlier alluding to, most of the Armenian American focus has been on the Armenian history, particularly the history of the genocide. This center at the USC focuses on present-day Armenia, present-day life of Armenians, endangered life of Armenians. So the fact that such a center exists, and there are not that many of them around the world, I have to think which other center do I know like this, of this size, that focuses on contemporary Armenian issues. This has sort of been my refuge after, as I mentioned, I used to be in media. I used to be the editor of the Armenian Reporter, which at one point was the largest Armenian newspaper, definitely the largest English language Armenian newspaper that worked in Armenia and in the US. Of course, it closed down over 5 years ago, so it's become my refuge after media, and I'm fortunate that it exists.
Thank you so much. And we have one more question. It starts off by saying, I love the question of how a Latina can support the Armenians, but I had my own question. I went to Armenian school for over 12 years. We learned about our Armenian history from when we were 3 years old. Here at GCC, I'm also surrounded by many Armenian friends and also in public as well through the friends that I've grown up with. I'm very subjective about how I feel about Armenia. It's very personal. How can I also be more objective?
Well, if you want to be more objective, I think objectivity comes with sort of education and inquiry. I came from my own subjective, notions of what Armenia is. I mean, I had very superficial knowledge. To this day, I don't speak fluent Armenian. I understand it very well, but I don't speak a fluent because I grew up speaking Russian. I grew up speaking English. I didn't ever went to an Armenian school. Never lived in a city with an Armenian school. So that my knowledge of Armenia was idealized considerably. Of course, my very first trip helped, back in the early 90s, helped sort of right some of my misconceptions. And I think with education, both sort of physical education, visiting places, visiting with people, meeting other people from other parts of Armenian world, not necessarily the one that you come from, helps you, I think, form a more critical, not negative, but sort of, academic, I guess, way of thinking of Armenians as another people. Not particularly bad and not particularly good, but of course caught in its own particular circumstances that are similar and dissimilar with other people's circumstances and other places. But yeah, it's education, it's about travel, it's about meeting people.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't agree more. We have a few minutes left. Did anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask? Or maybe some experiences that they'd like to share? Okay. Well, I wanted to remind
yes, I have a question.
Yes, thank you, Hasmik.
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Dr. Sanamyan, for the presentation. My question is there, in your studies or in the areas that you're at, is there any database of all the NGOs or nonprofit organizations that are active in Armenia? Because if we have a certain database, we can connect the people that they really are in need and government hasn't helped them to those organizations, because there are a lot of NGOs operating in Armenia and Artsakh, but people have no way of connecting to them. So I wonder if there is somebody or an organization that can work on this very real and important issue, because obviously there are a lot also reaching out to Diaspora or to other Facebook users or anybody asking for money. They're saying we don't have food. Can be people that they're soliciting money to, but really talking to village people, especially the borderline villages. In fact, I personally have the experience that many borderline villages didn't get really help from government during the war, after the war. And I wonder if there's any kind of this database somehow that somebody can work on and we can share. Thank you.
There is not that such a database. There used to be, but this was the case when there were few NGOs in Armenia and it was just beginning. I remember Armenian Assembly of America used to maintain a database of, and I had to work on it at one point. While I was working at the Armenian Assembly, I worked to update the NGO database. It might still exist, but it would be, outdated by almost 20 years now. It's just the case that the number of NGOs, number of organizations, number of people is great. It's hard to bring them all together into one database. And yes, there's great degree of disorganization in terms of the Armenian government trying to figure out, or even attempting to figure out who needs what, and who needs what kind of support. I'll share my own personal kind of response to that. When my family was asking, who do we help, who do we support, and where do we send the money, and there was I've had some experience with the Armenian Wounded Warriors Project. They were, of course, supporting primarily wounded servicemen, but also they support generally medical supplied medical supplies and other sort of emergency supplies to people in need of them. And there are plenty of other organizations that have that track record. I just, again, I would think that dispersing assistance to every individual village, every individual entity and individual, I don't think is an effective way to go. There are some organizations that, like one I mentioned, the Armenian Wounded Warriors Project, that have a track record, good track record, solid track record. People are experienced and know how to handle the money and how to move it quickly and how to acquire resources and move the resources quickly. So I would just suggest that just look into what organizations have that track record and work with them, unless you want to be there on the ground yourself. Because if you're not there on the ground yourself, you really need a trusted intermediary and experienced intermediary, because there are plenty of people who would want to do good things, would think that they know how to order something, I don't know, on Alibaba and bring it to Armenia, but it's also the cultural aspect of Armenian people. They like to over commit. So I suggest you work with people who have track record of delivering on their commitments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yes, I definitely the track record, transparency. I think it's all very important. If we're right about at 1:30, I just wanted to remind everybody that if you have not yet had an opportunity to do so, please do be sure to sign in. So again, we invite everyone to sign in, faculty, staff, guests, and anyone else who is present here today. And for faculty, we will be sending out the flex forms shortly after the event. But are there any last questions that we'd like to ask our speaker for today? Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Emil, for being here with us today. It was so interesting. It's always so wonderful to hear really the roots of history and to think about, where we've come from there. Thinking about the history of Armenian identities and how they affect us as both diasporans and really just humanitarians living today. We really appreciate your time and your insight. I also wanted to thank everybody else for joining us today to both understand more about the resilience after genocide and the ways in which we can continue to support one another at GCC and beyond. So at this point, I think we can go ahead and stop the recording and start our transition to our healing circle. If you're